In Paul's letter to the Galatians, he writes about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, and so on. And when people hear that, when they read that, they think love, joy, peace, yeah, those are nice, but you know what I really want? Patience. And could I have that now, please? I mean, there's a lot of jokes about patience or our lack of patience. For example, how do you measure the length of a second? Well, it's the time it takes before you honk after the light turns green. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of jokes like that, and we laugh at them, but they really show our nature, don't they? You see, while we could cover tips and techniques that could help you with patience, they're kind of like bandages that really don't address the issue. The true issue is our nature. And the only way we can transform our nature is through God's nature. So for us, right here, right now, we're going to take a look at God's nature and learn from Him. And to do that, we're going to go to one of the most important sections in the Old Testament from Exodus chapter 34. Before I read the scripture, though, I want to give you a little bit of context here. So, God has freed the Israelites from slavery. They're now free. You'd think they'd be grateful, but no. They moan, they complain, they're stubborn like rebellious teenagers. And if you've ever been the parent of a rebellious teenager, you know what it is to have patience or impatience. So anyway, they're at the Mount Sinai. Moses goes up the mountain to get the 10 Commandments. And he's 40 days and 40 nights up on the mountain. And the people get impatient. And so they build a golden calf to worship that calf rather than God. Moses comes down the mountain. He sees what the people have done. He loses his cool. He loses his patience. He breaks the tablets. Then God, in His kindness, actually says, here are the directions to go to the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. But no, they're still rebellious teenagers. That's briefly the context. So now let's go to Exodus chapter 34, starting with verse 6. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sin. That right there is critical. That's the nature of God. Listen to it again. A God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity. But what does that all mean? So when we talk about mercy or merciful, what does that mean? Well, to have mercy is to withhold the punishment that someone else deserves. But why would you ever withhold punishment for what another person actually deserves? Well, Scripture says that God has compassion. And compassion is connected with love, steadfast love. I mean, you can't have compassion without love, and you can't have mercy without compassion. So, because God is loving and compassionate, He is merciful, and He withholds the punishment that another deserves. And that mercy, compassion, and love lead to patience. You see, it also says that God is slow to anger. Because He is merciful, because He is loving and compassionate, He is slow to anger. It does not mean that He will always withhold His wrath, but because of His mercy and love, He is slow to anger, and He will bear with us longer than you and I would ever bear with one another. So let me ask you, if God withholds the punishment that the Israelites deserved, and they deserved death, by the way, if He can withhold that and have patience, can't you wait a couple more seconds at a stoplight or stop sign if somebody's taking a little bit longer than you think? Couldn't you have patience for that person who has 20 items in the fast checkout lane when they're only supposed to have 15? Or what about the child who doesn't do what you told them to do for the fourth or fifth time? Or your spouse who doesn't see things exactly your way? Or a church member who has a different idea of how things should be done? Or even somebody on the different side of the fence, politically or even morally? You see, when we take on the mind, the heart of Jesus, and we are merciful and loving, compassionate, and we forgive others rather than retaliating in kind, when we do that, we are more like Jesus than any other time. And when we're like that, when we have His mind, His heart, His attitude, if you will, His nature, when we have that, do you know what we become? We become patient.